Up until now, we've been focusing on urban issues in developed nations. However, many of the same issues are present in developing countries, and developing countries also have some unique issues to their populations. In general, in developing countries overall, there is a shift that we're seeing in population. People are moving to urban environments in search of work um, and better housing or access to water. And by 2030, the United Nations predicts that about 60% of all people will live in an urban area. And the majority of the shift that we see occurring from rural to urban areas is taking place in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Caribbean. And so as these population shifts take place, it's important that these countries plan so they can accommodate the population shift, develop adequate infrastructure, and keep their urban areas healthy for the populations. In developing countries, we said people are moving to seek better jobs, and by 2030, we said 60% of people in these countries will live in urban areas. And to quantify that, that's 3 billion new people that will be moving to urban areas and will require affordable housing. And that's the key. It has to be affordable housing. And so that's not as simple as it sounds in some of these cities. These cities currently don't have enough housing and infrastructure to support their growing populations, and so that is an issue. And then I wanted to just mention the four areas in which they have to focus on infrastructure. So clean water, they need to have delivery systems that will deliver clean drinking water to all of the people living in these new housing developments. Sewage is a huge issue around the world, and sanitation services, so basically where do things go when you flush your toilet, and do you have access to a toilet? And in many places that's not the case. Reliable energy sources are critical, so is there enough energy to supply all of the new housing with electricity? And then finally, is there transportation infrastructure in place so that all of these people that are moving into the cities can get to work and get to the grocery store, shopping areas, or farmers markets? A lot of people that move to urban areas, if they are from if they're not well off in a rural area and then they move to the urban area looking for work, they tend to be low-income families. And when they get to the city, they can't find affordable housing and they end up in a slum. A slum is defined by the United Nations by these 5 criteria, and we kind of discussed them on the last slide. So you live in a slum if there is inadequate access to safe water, inadequate access to sanitation and sanitation infrastructure, so sewers and way to take waste water out of your area and put it safely somewhere to be treated. Also, if the quality of the housing is not structurally sound. And so in this picture here, you can see there's tarps on top of the roof is basically a tarp, and it's being held up by these support beams. And is that really enough if they have a big rain, or is that rain going to wash these support beams out? What's going to happen to this structure? Overcrowding is also an issue in slums. So you have a lot of people living in a very dense environment, and if they don't have access to sanitation services, that compounds the issue. And then finally, insecure residential status means, if somebody builds a house on a sidewalk in a city, and it's not their land, so anyone can, the police or anyone can come along and say, look, you can't live here, you have to move your house. Or some people will, they'll just find a vacant lot and put their housing up, such as it is, and then someone comes along and says, no, I want to build my house on this lot that I bought, and so the people have to move. So insecure residential status is also part of the criteria for a place to be considered to be a slum. This is a global issue that people do not have access to affordable housing, or people live in slums. Worldwide, 1.6 billion people out of about 7.5 billion people are living in inadequate shelter. And then if we look at slums in particular, so very inadequate if it meets those criteria for a slum, that's 1 in 7 people around the globe. By the year 2030, as more people move to these urban centers, 1 out of 4 people will be living in a slum at the current trend. In developed countries, 1 out of every 3rd person lives in a slum. So in developing countries, it's definitely more of an issue. A larger percentage of the population is living in a slum. And then 90% of the urban population lacks access to affordable housing, and I think this got copied over, so I will fix that. This is a nice chart. You can get a ton of data from the World Bank, and this one, if you go online and look at it live, you can scroll over these different cities or countries, I'm sorry, and see the percent, but it is spelled out in this legend. And so all of the white countries that are shown, that means that a small percentage, so definitely less than 15% of people in those countries live in slums. The countries that are shaded in the darker blue, they have more than 60% of their population is living in slums. One of the criteria for slums was that people do not have access to clean water. And this is an issue for people whether or not they live in a slum. Worldwide, water access is a problem for many people. Some people, so 840 million people around the world, have to travel more than 30 minutes from their home in order to access a source of improved drinking water, meaning that it's maybe a well that helps to, that's filtered water in it from water that goes through the ground and keeps it safe from contamination. Another 1.3 billion people do not have access to safe drinking water at their home, so maybe nearby. So example here, you see all of these folks gathering around a faucet of water. So all of these people are sharing this source of water, and so they have access to it near their home, and they can get to it in less than 30 minutes, but it's not in their house. The good news is that from the year 2000 to 2015, 1.5 billion people around the globe, a huge percentage of people, gained access to improved water sources. And so we are making progress in this area. Similarly, we're making progress in providing water sanitation or sewer systems. And in that same span of time, 1.4 billion people, so about the same amount of people that gained access to drinking water, gained access to sanitation services. But the story is still not great. That means that only 2.9 billion people across the globe access water sanitation systems that are safely managed. So that would mean that it's a toilet, they have access to a toilet or a latrine that's just for their household, not shared. There are almost as many, so 2.3 billion people around the globe that have access to sanitation services, but they have to share them between households. And then almost 900 million people don't have access to any sanitation systems at all. And so, that doesn't sound as big because it's millions versus billions, but I want you to think about the fact that that's about 2.5 times the population of the United States. So it's still a huge number of people. And a lot of these people that don't have access to sanitation systems are people that are living in rural areas. And again, that's another part of the reason that people are moving to urban centers, because they think they'll have better access to some of these services. Energy is another necessity for people around the globe, and in order for a housing area to be considered improved, it has to have access to a reliable energy source. Additionally, if in order to provide this, we need, the energy helps us to provide transportation, it helps us to provide infrastructure, because then we can power the machines that are necessary to build the infrastructure. It helps us to grow food and deliver water, and it helps us to fuel industries and commercial activities that require energy. So we said a lot of people are moving into the cities. Cities are where the gross domestic product of a country is produced. More than 75% of countries' GDP comes out of cities. That's good news. The bad news is that these cities also consume more than 75% of the global energy that's produced. And so they're consuming a lot of energy in order to generate a lot of products. And they emit 50 to 60% of the world's greenhouse gases. One big push in developing nations, because they are currently developing their energy infrastructure and how they deliver energy to these households, there's a big push to make sure that that new energy that's being developed is renewable energy. And while renewable energy is great, you have to make sure that you have multiple forms of renewable energy so that you can produce energy around the clock. No matter whether it's windy out or if it's sunny out, you need to have backup systems available. And then the use of smart grids are great because they can help to schedule tasks so that certain things come on only when there's less demand on the power grid and then turn back off when the demand gets increased. So you can do this in your own home actually. There's systems you can put in place so that you don't use too much energy at any one time, and so like it will turn off one appliance if your dishwasher is running or your clothes washer is running. I just want to remind you too that as a consumer, you hold the power, I know it's a bad pun, by reducing the amount of energy that you consume and by shifting the times in which you use that energy so that you're not overwhelming the power grid. And if everyone turns their air conditioners on at the same time, that's a big spike in energy that's needed, and the power plants can't always keep up with that. And so then they build more power plants to meet that peak demand, even though really they could have met that demand if not everyone used power at the same time. And finally, if we consume less products that have less packaging and that require less transportation to get to us, that will produce less pollution and less waste. So that's true in developing countries as well as developed countries. Because these developing countries are planning their infrastructure, they're able to consider these things, whereas some developed countries, the infrastructure is already there, and it's not always the most sustainable, but since it's already there, it doesn't financially make sense to remove it and put something else in. And the fourth thing that we said is necessary for planning new developments in developing countries is transportation infrastructure. So in developing countries, people tend to walk to get to where they need to go. 70% of all trips are people walking. And so they either don't have access to transportation systems or they're too expensive. But in many cases, there aren't good transportation systems in place because they're very expensive to build and maintain. And this can lead to urban sprawl if it's not planned well. Urban sprawl, we said, it leads to increased distances between the different places that we need to go, which makes it necessary to have a car, which then in turn can lead to more sprawl, because if you already purchased a car, you might as well drive farther to get to work. So the problem with, especially in developing countries, but also it's true in developed countries, is that whenever there's a long distance from where people can afford to live to the urban center where the jobs are, then that's going to exclude the lower income populations who just can't afford a car to get into the city. So that's why, so they have to walk, and if it's too far, they can't get there. And this also leads, whenever we have more cars and more driving, that leads to more greenhouse gas emissions. And so as these developing countries are growing, they're trying to plan how can they put in bike paths and walking paths and public transportation and things that will take the emphasis off roads and put the emphasis on walking, biking, busing, taking shuttles, etc.